Awards. So, yeah, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies. It's a pleasure to have you all here. And yeah, I'm delighted to welcome you to this side event on the relation between MIPAA policies and human rights mechanisms. And I'm welcoming you in the name of the three organizing organizations, so the Federal Ministry for Family Affairs, Senior Citizens, Women and Youth, Age Platform Europe, who's already here in part, but is going to join us in a minute as well, and BAGSO, which stands for the German National Association of Senior Citizens Organizations, and yeah, which I'm representing. And I'd like to address a special welcome to our minister sitting next to me, Ms. Lisa Paus. It's a real pleasure to have you here. Yeah, and before moving to the content, I mean, you can see my name, but maybe just very briefly also, I'm Ina Völker. I work for BAGSO, and I'm heading the Secretariat for International Policy on Aging there. As you all know, we have heard in the last 2 days that the adoption of the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging really was an important milestone for aging policy worldwide. And it has contributed to the human rights agenda for older persons and brought also about advances at national level. We have all heard this in the last couple of days with plenty of evidence. But we have also heard that MIPAA is not sufficient. I mean, many of us, especially civil society organizations, but also member states and UN agencies, we all have been asking to have a legally binding international human rights instrument because we feel or we know that the human rights of all the persons are not sufficiently protected yet. And well, MIPAA is aligned with human rights, but it is not a human rights document. And we wanted to discuss the parallel discussions, the discussions that we're having here about the implementation of the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging with the parallel developments at international level, where we are focusing very much on the human rights of older persons. And to highlight maybe is the open-ended working group on aging, which has been established in 2010, but when the General Assembly decided in Resolution 65-182 to establish the open-ended working group with the purpose of strengthening the protection of human rights of older persons. And in parallel to the work at the open-ended working group, which met this year in April for the 12th time, there are other international processes and discussions which also address the well-being and the human rights of older persons. Hi, Maciek. Good to have you here. And some of these processes we'll hear more about throughout our side event, but maybe just to highlight 2 or 3. So under the auspices of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the OHCHR, there are 2 very important aspects to mention or work to mention. One is the mandate of the independent expert for the full enjoyment of all human rights of older persons, which is here, Claudia Mahler. You have heard her speak in the last couple of days, and her work is very important to advance the human rights of older persons at international level. And also important to mention is the work of the Human Rights Council, which adopted a very substantive resolution on ageism and age discrimination last year. And both these processes really, they are putting pressure also on the open-ended working group to deliver to its mandate. Also important to mention, I think, is another policy framework, which is the UN Decade of Healthy Aging, which we have also heard about during the last couple of days, also with the side event yesterday. And of course, we also have to keep in mind when speaking about aging policies, the 2030 agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals, and also our common agenda of the United Nations Secretary General, which also provides an orientation. And all of these developments, they are important as strategies to improve the living conditions of older persons and remind us of MIPAA's vision to create a society for all ages. But we have been conceptualizing this side event, thinking about how can you really make sure that these processes build on each other, that we actually know about all of them and do not forget one or the other, and also think about the challenges that we still have ahead of us, but also think about what we have achieved already. And at least, from civil society perspective, really for us, the big question is how can we move forward faster to better protect the human rights of all the persons. So these are some of the questions that I'm pleased to discuss with the distinguished panelists and also with our key keynote speakers. And so without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce you to Lisa Warth, which actually I don't need to introduce you to her because you have all seen and heard her, and we're very grateful for everything she has done for us during the last couple of days. Lisa is Populations Affairs Officer at the Population Unit at the Statistical Division of UNECE, and she will give us some input on MIPAA and the discussion that we're having here today. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you very much, Ina, and thank you very much to the organizers of the side event. First of all, to organize the side event, because I think it's a very beautiful and pertinent addition to the discussions we've been having and having today in the plenary, and also thank you for inviting me. So I just want to make a few remarks regarding MIPAA and human rights mechanisms and the interconnections. I don't need to explain what MIPAA is. We're all here because we are reviewing and celebrating the 20 years of its adoption. But I want to say that MIPAA has a really important part, which is to institutionally root these 5-year periodic reviews. And through that, over the past, now 4 cycles of implementation, that part has ensured that MIPAA stays on the agenda. And as we often hear, it's not legally binding. It's a framework that guides voluntary action across the region, across the world. But from my perspective, now having already been involved in the 2nd Ministerial Conference on Aging, Lisbon, and now here, I see no fatigue. After 20 years, on the contrary, I think there is a lot of interest and commitment by governments for the implementation of MIPAA. The other really good thing that MIPAA did is to stress the importance of connecting aging with the broader social and economic development frameworks and human rights mechanisms. So it kicked us off on this road of mainstreaming aging, as you've heard now so many times already during these 2 days, 20 years ago. And we're still struggling with making that a reality. It's important, but it's not easy to do. Here we go with the interlinkages. Now, the call, of course, of a legally binding, for a convention, for a legally binding instrument for the protection of the rights of older persons is an important one, and it is certainly one important instrument for that purpose. But I think, we have to be also careful because, we are, first of all, humans before we are old, and our age is only one characteristic which defines us. We can be an older woman, we can be a young migrant, we can be, a middle-aged person with disabilities, we can be, a male refugee who is older. So we have human rights instruments that don't focus on age. And we know, and I think it's been researched, it's been debated with, among those of you who are advancing this agenda, that it's very difficult to get the age dimension across the different human rights mechanisms we already have. So yes, we call for a dedicated instrument, but on the other hand, it is also important to work on all fronts and to make sure to identify and point to the barriers that currently exist in the frameworks, but also in the processes and mechanisms of reviewing progress, to make sure that the voice of older persons is heard, that there is time for submissions, for interventions, for pointing out these reasons. So that's one methodological part, I guess, of mainstreaming across different human rights mechanisms. But then the other thing is, what I want to mention, is that we often hear, and Ina just said it herself, MIPAA is not sufficient. It's relying on governments to act voluntarily. It's not legally binding. It's not forcing action. And yes, that's true. But let me just ask you, are you all motivated primarily by being law-abiding? Or is what is driving your advocacy and effort not rather voluntary conviction that what you're standing for, what you're working for, is what you believe in? So I'm not saying that, we don't need laws and regulations and clear processes to protect entitlements and rights, but we can't just rely on that. We need the whole toolbox of instruments. We need to persuade, we need to inform, we need to encourage, we need to provide incentives, as well as a legal framework. So I think it's important within that broader aging community of researchers, civil society, government representatives, citizens interested in advancing the implementation of MIPAA and advancing the fulfillment, the enjoyment of all human rights by all age groups, including older persons, is to make use and to advance all of these at the same time. So they are complementary, and in that way, I wouldn't say MIPAA isn't sufficient, but MIPAA is one important guiding framework that to this date still remains our guiding framework and has not lost, at least in my opinion, and I think also in many people's opinion, its relevance. On the contrary, it becomes more relevant by the year. So I would like to leave you just with that. I encourage you to while promoting a convention, to also work on all fronts and advance all of these together because they're complementary. So that's what I would like to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for this very clear and concise message that you're leaving with us. And I know that maybe during the course of the side event you have to leave, so we again thank you already at this point. Next, I'm very happy to introduce you to Amal Abu Rafey, Chief of the Program of the Aging Section at UNDESA in New York. Amal serves on the Secretariat of the Secretaries General Open-Ended Working Group on Aging, or for the purpose of strengthening the protection of the human rights of older persons, what we call the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. She joined the United Nations in 2001, working in the areas of social policy, sustainable development, and demography. And she's also a member of the World Economic Forum Global Future Council on Healthy Aging and Longevity. Yeah, and given Amal's extensive experience and all the work that she's doing at the United Nations in New York, I'm very pleased that we can have her here and to share her insights. Thank you, Amal.
Thank you so much, Ina. I really appreciate it, and I especially appreciate all of you being here. I would think by now you're tired of hearing my voice, especially after summarizing the roundtable ministerial session early this morning. I also want to take the opportunity to acknowledge the presence of my boss, Daniela Bass, who directs the Division for Inclusive Social Development at DESA in New York, and you'll be hearing from her later on this afternoon during the closing session of the conference. The team that works in the division of DESA, we are the custodians both of MIPAA and of servicing the open-ended working group on aging. That should end the discussion right over there. If around 3/4 of the membership of the General Assembly agreed to link the questions of aging with other frameworks for social and economic development as well as human rights, then why are we having this side event today? If you look carefully, in the foreword of MIPAA, the UN Secretary General at the time, Kofi Annan, predicted where the bottleneck would be when he said, but the real test will be implementation. So just to move away from presentations that we've been doing for 2 days now, I thought I'd throw in a question of True or false to all of you? True or false? A convention advocate said, "The promotion and protection of all human rights and fundamental freedoms is essential for the creation of an inclusive society for all ages in which older persons participate fully and without discrimination and on the basis of equality." If you thought that's true, an advocate for the convention said that, let me correct you and tell you that's false. MIPAA said that. Therefore, any discussion around pitting a human rights perspective against a development perspective, in our very humble view, is not a technical one. I think it's a political one. And I'll give some examples. And I've mentioned those during the joint forum, some of them. You know, we've heard often that MIPAA is old. That's very interesting, because the same plan of action on youth, which is actually dates older than MIPAA, I've never heard any of the stakeholders refer to that document as old. We've heard that MIPAA is dead. Great, then somebody explained to me why during the third review and appraisal, 2/3 of the membership of the United Nations participated in that review and appraisal process. It's alive and well and kicking. Some of the political discussions may be territorial. Some colleagues feel that if we focus on a convention, it minimizes the importance of economic and social development work. Others say that, oh, the UN is looking for another mandate to justify why it should receive more funds and staffing and work some more. Some territorial arguments say that, well, in this region, we're doing so well for older persons that we've actually moved beyond MIPAA, and we don't really need a convention. Some political territorial discussions relate to human resources, that colleagues are already overburdened with existing conventions, and to layer on top yet an additional one, you know, does that make sense? And my personal favorite is, what does this convention bring to the table? Because this to me means that as an international community, we failed to bring older persons to the forefront of global discussions and the political radar of member states when it comes to rights. Because as one of my colleagues in civil society in New York mentioned many times, there are hundreds of documents that have been produced by the United Nations following a decade-long of discussions in the General Assembly Open-Ended Working Group on Aging related to normative gaps and how existing human rights mechanisms have to date failed older persons. And of course, the word age is missing in Article 2 in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And that's what my colleague in New York in Human Rights, Craig Mkhayber, refers to as the original sin, which we think explains why explicit reference to age in core existing international human rights treaties are scarce, and why many national anti-discrimination laws around the world, I'm speaking beyond the region, of course, fails to address ageism against older persons in a holistic manner. Often, when deliberations like this linger, going back and forth to no end, I try to recenter myself by remembering the people that we aim to serve, which is older people on the ground. And Daniela knows the story well. I'm originally from Saudi Arabia, but my mother is Lebanese from the mountains in Lebanon, and I remember two older women in her town. One has rights. Both live, by the way, borderline poverty. One has rights. Her husband passed away, and according to the law, and I would add to the Sharia law, she gets an inheritance from her husband. And it was a pretty hefty amount of cash in the bank. But she would not access that money because the social context does not allow her to. And some of you might think, a patriarchal society, oh my God, these men. It's not men. Oh, these intergenerational conflicts, these younger people, probably the kids, the grandsons. No. Other older women pressure her not to access that money that the law allows her to access. You've lived your life. Why would you need this for? And that social pressure is expressed in terms of isolation. Do you know what older widowed women do in that town in the mountains? Their only outings are basically prayer sessions, group prayer sessions, and when someone burials and when someone passes away. That's their activity. And she would be at the threat of being socially isolated, that when you die, no one will bless you or say a prayer for you because you were greedy to access that money, which the law secures for her. Now, 2 buildings away from that is another older woman, also poverty line, at risk of falling into poverty. She checks all our development box, things that we would like to see. Education, check. Healthcare, check. Access to employment, check. In fact, she worked for Middle East Airlines, which is a formal source of employment, so she gets pension. But the law allows her husband to access her pension. And he gets that cash and he spends it however he likes, which is mostly for her, unfortunately, is gambling and drinking, and she has no access to that money that social context provides. Clearly, at a humane individual basis, when we leave these discussions that we have in these conferences and when we research at our computers, older people need both. It's a no-brainer, and I hope this example sort of brought it to the surface. I have to be honest, though, that what terrifies me on a personal basis is that following a global pandemic, which we all know the statistics related to it, where at least 70% of people who passed away in horrific situations were older people, and where member states know well that by 2030, the target date of the Sustainable Development Goals globally, older people will outnumber youth. These will be your constituents by the target of the Sustainable Development Goals. Yet it's astonishing to me to see that the political will needle in both the socioeconomic context and the human rights context has hardly moved. What will it take? That's a terrifying question to ask. Now, the open-ended working group of the General Assembly concluded its 12th session earlier this year, and I want to take this opportunity, especially with your Excellency being with us today, to express my and our division and team's gratitude to the collaborative, constructive, supportive role undertaken by the German delegation in New York under the leadership of the head of delegation, Dr. Matthias von Matthias von Schwanenflügel. I've practiced all night for this. In that regard. Yeah. I'll keep practicing, clearly, nowhere near. And during the discussions on the way forward, the open-ended working group set up a cross-regional core group with support that came from around 30 member states across the regions to move the conversation forward. And we believe that this initiative will allow for increased discussions behind closed diplomatic doors, which we hope would accelerate front-channel discussions and announce positions at the 13th session next year. As with any other issue, there are those who support the convention, and there are those who do not. However, both sides constitute, at the working group, from what we see and hear, a small number of countries. Most member states are sitting on the fence, and it's not clear to me if they are neutral, hesitant, or still indecisive on this issue. Also, while there is a slow and steady increase in the number of member states that express openness to discuss the feasibility of a new measure, including a legally binding convention, there is clearly, as of yet, no firm commitment from what we see in the work that's being done at the General Assembly. I hope, Ina, this sets the scene for the conversation today, and I thank you.
Thank you, Amal. And yeah, I think we had some two very good inputs to set the scene today and to make clear that MIPAA is important, and to complement MIPAA, we need an international legally binding instrument. I don't want to prolong myself summing up things, and rather move now to our dear Minister for Family Affairs, Senior Citizens, Women and Youth of Germany, Ms. Lisa Paus. She was member of the German Bundestag from 2009 to 2019, and 22?
I'm still a member of the German Bundestag.
Okay. I didn't invent that. I got that from somewhere, so there must be a correction to be made on the internet or somewhere. But was also a member of the finance committee, including as a chairperson, and that probably no longer. And before this, she was also working in the office of a member of the European Parliament, so also has already some international experience that she brings here to the table. Yeah, Mrs. Paus, Germany plays, as we just have heard as well, a key role really to make sure that aging policy remains on the agenda of international discussions. And indeed, Germany has been crucial also to bringing aging and older persons back on the agenda of the EU Council during its presidency in 2020, when it proposed council conclusions on the well-being and human rights of older people in times of digitalization. So we were wondering if you could just give us an overview in which of the international processes related to older people and aging Germany is involved, and yeah, what can be done so that we can create more synergies between these processes as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I actually had an internship once upon a time at the UN in New York with the United Nations Center on Transnational Corporations, but it was in 1990 or something. Well, I think Amal Rafi did really put the scene very, very clearly, and you know, everybody knows that we are in favor of the convention, and therefore, the federal government has been actively engaged in the work of the UN Open-Ended Working Group and the UN ECE Standing Working Group. And Germany is also a member of this now informal core group of the Open-Ending Working Group. This core group has been initiated by Argentina during this year's meeting, and its task is to draft a proposal for the establishment of a formal sub-working group of the Open-Ending Working Group, give input to fulfill the mandate, identifying gaps in the human rights system for older persons, and make proposals on how to close them. I'm as curious as Amal Rafi, what are the different parts of the other members? You really made it visible, like on the fence or wherever, but still we need something to talk about, and therefore this core group is working on that, and we are really happy that we can be part of that. An important source for this work will be the work done in the monitoring of the implementation of MIPAA, because the UN member states have committed to implement MIPAA and thus identified fields of action to improve the living conditions of older persons. The new ministerial declaration, which we will sign later this afternoon, tasked the Standing Working Group with drafting a new regional implementation strategy for this region, and this will set new political standards in the areas with blind spots, such as digitalization or the combating of ageism. We, the federal government of Germany, support the work of the open-ended working group. For instance, we co-funded the working paper of the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights on normative standards for older persons, and the UN ECE by contributing considerable amounts to the UN ECE Aging Fund. The last 20 years on the COVID-19 pandemic have demonstrated that policy approaches are an important part of policymakers, but not the only one. They should, and this is my opinion, go hand in hand with the application drafting of adequate international legally binding instruments. Therefore, I call on member states to support the work of the open-ended working group of aging in New York. It's now time to ensure that human rights have no age limit. This is the position of the federal government of Germany.
Many thanks, Mrs. Paus. Yeah, these are very interesting insights, and let me also take the opportunity to thank you on behalf of AGE. I think I can speak as well, for all the support that you're giving to us as civil society organizations as well at international level. which is very important for us to move forward. And yeah, now I'm delighted to call upon Laura Baldassare. She is Secretary General of the Italian Ministerial Committee for Human Rights at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs since 2020. And before, she worked with UNICEF in Italy and also at the National Ombudsperson for Children's Rights. So you have a lot of experience, Ms. Baldassare, at with national laws and policies. And it would be interesting for us, I think, to hear what you can tell us about reporting and follow-up for the effective implementation of international human rights commitments in Italy. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting us to this meeting. And my task here would be to give a national perspective on how we are using in Italy international human rights instruments. And I'm happy to have here a past the General Secretary of the Interministerial Committee for Human Rights, which is based at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And it was established, I want to highlight this, in 1978. So we have a long history in Italy. And it's important now to highlight the fact that we are a national mechanism for reporting, follow-up, and implementation. And I want to underline implementation of the international standards. And so we have specific focal points into the various ministries, but also some UN agencies as well university and researchers are part of this committee. We review laws and also regulations, administrative measures, just to translate into Italy what we have adopted at the international and national level. So there is a permanent advisory activity we are managing in Italy, and in particular I want to put the attention here on the drafting activity in some specific plans of action, in particular the business and human rights plan of actions, and we are also part of some national observatories, so we have the opportunity to work in drafting the various national plans of action. And coming to the mainstreaming issues, it was mentioned before, this is a very important. So what we have learned, I shortly. First of all, I want to share with you the importance to use what we already have. So also we have to use what the instrument we already have working in parallel, as now we are discussing today in getting more effective instruments. But please keep in mind the importance to use the tools we do already have. Secondly, the coordination. In Italy, we have these focal points in the different ministries, and you know better than me that this could be also closed circles of people. And this is a situation at national level as well as at the regional and international level. So we have to keep in mind the importance to work also at cultural level and also among professionals, experts, and in my streamings, our human rights approach to all the functionaries in the public and non-governmental side. Then we have this regular dialogue with the civil society organization. In Italy, we don't have the independent human rights commissioner or institution. So our committee has a particular role in the permanent dialogue with the civil society. Then it's very important for us the collaborative approach to the UN organizations. And I will go into detail on what participation for us is. And academia, please keep in mind the importance of working with professors, but we have to work also with students. And it's important to work with the Students' Association, involving them. So in having a general overview when we want to have a close relation with the academia. Reporting, follow-up, and implementation. We have to go into details, and we have to monitoring and evaluating our plans of action related to human rights standards. This is very important. So we are trying to do also a methodological efforts to monitoring and evaluating our achievements in Italy. And then keep in mind the importance to work also with local governments. Human rights, in general, we work at national level, at the regional level, but what about local governments? So just to give you an example, we are working now with the National Association of the local governments in Italy, trying to have a permanent training for them on human rights in general, then going into specific human rights standards. Innovation, we have to be innovative and to build on, as mentioned before, what we have learned worldwide. Then just a last word on the holistic approach. The holistic approach to human rights, it's usually at the beginning of our documents. We should put it also at the end of them. So it's important to involve people concerned at the beginning, the drafting process of our document plans and so on, but also in monitoring and in evaluating our action. This is what I want to share with you, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Baldassare. It seems like we kind of agreed on this before, because you made a very nice move over now to the perspective of the civil society organizations, because you just mentioned the importance of the participation of those most concerned. So it's my pleasure to introduce you now to Maciek. It's difficult to look at you. Maciek Kuradzic, he's the Secretary General of Age Platform Europe. You have also heard him speak earlier today. Age Platform Europe is the European Union's largest network organization, and you have seen many people walking around with the badge, people that are from member organizations of Age Platform Europe. And Maciek, we're very glad to have you here on board, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you a bit about giving your vast experience really influencing policy at European and international level as well on mainstreaming human rights in different processes. So from your perspective, what can be done in the UNECE region to move towards a better protection of the human rights of older persons? Thank you.
Great, good afternoon, thank you very much.
Oh, wait.
Sorry, Thank you very much, Ina, for the introduction. Good afternoon to everyone. I was just thinking to avoid maybe that we are a bit repetitive. I think we've heard already a lot over the last three days. But I think what's, well, first of all, maybe as an introduction, yes, we have to recognize when looking at the role of the UNEC is that obviously the COVID pandemic very clearly actually was a blow to the attainment of the regional implementation strategy objectives. So I think the first thing for the UNEC, for the governments, is really to stock take on the lessons or basically agree on what needs to be reorganized also in the monitoring of the implementation of the renewed objectives and the commitments. That's the first thing. But I was also, and obviously the UNEC, the MIPAA, let's say, process should not actually function in a silos. So I think here also the links to the work, to also the data, everything which is available but in other actually UN agencies, but I was also thinking whether to what extent the UNEC could cooperate with other institutional partners, the OECD, the World Bank, those institutions that also actually look and start to work on those different policy areas, including, for example, long-term care, maybe taking the perspective more of financing, so sustainability, but they are not necessarily actually aware about this dimension of human rights. So I think it will be interesting to show that the core of the strategic thinking, as it said by the governments in the declaration, is to recognize the human rights approach, and this is something which the UNEC can actually promote, as I said, in the cooperation with the other institutional partners. But then already discussing with some of you colleagues from the other NGOs, but also from the researcher community, we thought, now when we look into the new implementation period of 5 years, we've got this declaration that we will have later on officially adopted by the member states, and obviously there will be monitoring of this declaration, of these commitments. But what about ours? What about what we said in our declaration? I think it was very eloquently said by you, Heidrun, when you said we are not repeating. We wanted to be complementary in our declaration. So because we are complementary, basically we would like as well those additional elements to be looked at and followed, because otherwise it will be again, I think, a separate, very official process of following the commitments by the member states, and at the same time, yes, you governments, UNEC, you gave us as civil society and researchers the space to contribute to this process. We are coming with our specific commitments that are additional, so we would like as well that the process is accountable but takes into account what we have said. So I think this is really very important. Yeah, I would maybe stop here for this first question. Of course, then unless there will be a second question, but I was thinking about the EU here. There is an obvious added value of what the European Union can do in the connection to the UNEC. Of course, I don't know whether there is anybody from the European Commission in the room. I do not think so. It's a real pity that we did not have, I would say, a stronger and more explicit actually presence of the European Union in this discussion, because yes, the EU is also following and, how to say, implementing the policies, the objectives which are part of the UNEC, and somehow exactly those efforts are not really put into conjunction. There is again this silos. So here I think maybe it's an initiative that should come also from the UNEC. I know it does not cover the whole region of the UNEC, but still the EU will be also an extremely important player in how to say, advancing on the discussion possible future convention on the rights of older persons. If I may, just the very last comment to what just Lisa, what you said at the beginning, wondering exactly to what extent we think, so is there like any trade or balance we want to find between exactly working for the convention, which will take certainly a moment, and then what can we do and what we wish as different stakeholders in the meantime? Well, I think, yes, we can certainly ensure, we must make sure that the national existing plans on active aging, they are really followed, they are implemented, because these things are already taking place in some of our member states, so the documents, the objectives are there. But at the very end, this convention is really something that we cannot put aside. Actually, for older people, that will be the first time ever that we will be able actually to raise the political identity of ourselves in the debate, that actually older people will also finally, how to say, get this co-ownership. Yesterday it was said by the researcher from Israel, Liat, actually, once you explain what ageism is about, older people start actually to think, oh yeah, actually this is what I'm living. The convention will actually raise this awareness among older people that actually the rights, this is something which relates to me, and so far it's not the case. So I think the convention will be really, from the perspective of older people, a major actually step forward.
Thank you, Maciek. And I think this also leads very nicely over to Kieran. Dr. Kieran Barbero, he's chair of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Older People, GAROP, which is a global network of almost 400 organizations from over 80 countries worldwide. And they are united in the call to for the rights of older persons and to raise their voice globally. Kieran, it's a real pleasure. Thank you, Lisa. Kieran, it's a real pleasure to have you here. And yeah, I'm very interested in hearing from your global perspective also now. We have spoken a lot about the UNECE, a bit about the EU, but I think it will be very interesting also to hear now from your global perspective, but also from Canada, which is also part of the UNECE. And I would be very interested to hear from you, how can we give older persons participation more value, more visibility in those discussions at global level? Thank you, Kieran.
Thank you so much, Ina. Sorry. Thank you very much, Ina, and to all the organizers for inviting me to be here today. It's an honor and a privilege to join the honorable dignitaries, ministers, and esteemed colleagues. There's a lot of knowledge and experience and wisdom in this room, and so I think it would be a mistake not to draw on it, don't you think? Okay, so let's start off with a show of hands. How many of you believe that MIPAA alone will achieve the goals and objectives of achieving total human rights for older people, especially given the pandemic situation? Show of hands, please. How many of you believe MIPAA alone will do it? Okay, thank you. How many of you believe that a convention, a UN convention, will help boost the impact of MIPAA if we have it? Okay, thank you. We can go home now. That's it, we're done. No? You don't, okay. No, but I will. You'll come back to that. Okay, so good. We're hoping to change your mind a little bit today. Okay, all right. It's more nuances. Of course, there's always nuances. And you know, this kind of interaction is really important. So we want to hear your point of view. But please allow me to add a few words to what's being said. So at this moment in time, the central transformative promise of the UN's 2030 agenda to leave no one behind remains a very elusive goal. MIPAA is a very important policy framework that made significant contributions and continues to do so to advance aging policy all across the world. However, it is our opinion, and it's not just a personal opinion, but opinion of a lot of other people, as you could see earlier today, that it's not universally applied, it's not legally binding, and doesn't impose duties on the states. Resulting policies fail to respect, protect, and promote all human rights of older people. And therefore, we believe that a new comprehensive international treaty on the human rights of older people, or a convention, is critically needed to complement and reinforce MIPAA. And you can think of it as a solid rocket booster, if you like, which is permanent. It will boost the MIPAA rocket, but it won't fall off, it'll stay there. This new convention is needed to provide a strong human rights framework for the rights of older people. It would help to better implement MIPAA, as it would state that a right is enjoyed by the individual against the state. Now, recent developments at the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging, in particular the establishment of the cross-regional core group that was mentioned earlier, and at the Human Rights Council, are very promising. But efforts have to be accelerated to fully ensure the enjoyment of all human rights by older people. Now, we have experts in the room. We have Dr. Claudia Mahler here, who is the independent expert on human rights for older people. She and others, Andrew Burns, and there's numerous other evidence that over the past few years have flagrantly been there's evidence that flagrant violations of human rights have taken place. And there's mountains of evidence, mountains, okay, all across the board. Several member states have blocked progress towards a better protection of human rights of older people, and this is no longer acceptable in the view of civil society. The COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated that current provisions are not enough, it's not adequate to ensure the dignity of people of all ages, and there should be no expiry date on human rights. The governments that block progress argue that existing policies and national legal provisions are sufficient. Well, I'm a scientist. I wear many hats, and the evidence does not support that. Okay? If you examine the evidence, it does not support that. They should strongly consider changing their position, and we should help them do that to ensure that older people can live in dignity and fully enjoy their human rights. So in conclusion, we must not permit the status quo and must make every effort to change its course. Now is the time to stand up and rally for the rights of older people. Every person on earth, young and old, will enjoy the benefits of this action. The global health and economy will also benefit from this. And I can talk a little bit more about that later if I'm given a chance. This is a no-brainer, as Amal said, completely a no-brainer. In a win-win situation for all parties. Throwing more money at it is not going to work without the proper instrument to make it work better. And I'll tell you, in Canada, for example, we spend hundreds of billions of dollars on our healthcare system where I work. And we don't get more than 10 cents out of every dollar that goes in. Only 10 cents gets to the bottom of, to the patient level. And I think we're doing the same thing with this human rights issue. Engagement of older people in civil society in combating ageism are critical to reach a viable solution for human rights violations. So that is one of the key things, to include older people in the discussions. And we're so happy to be here as civil society to participate in this dialogue. So I would like to leave you with a call to action. First, I call on the Standing Working Group on Aging of the UNECE to put older people as rights holders at the center of the updated regional implementation strategy. Second, every person around the world is called upon to support, protect, and promote human rights of older people by uniting and calling on their governments to take immediate action. Third, governments and policymakers, there are many in this room who have a lot of influence and power to make the changes, also have a major role to play in this campaign to end ageism and the human rights violations of older people. They must be held accountable and culpable if they do not participate. Fourth, I urge you all to ensure that your government is actively engaged and supports the work of the United Nations Open-Ended Working Group. And finally, a UN Convention on the Rights of Older People is now urgently needed, and to guide governments on ways to protect older people's rights and to form a basis for policy, programming, public awareness, and education. Such a convention would include a compulsory reporting mechanism and would guarantee the formal rights of people. Let me remind you, what you permit, you promote. I said this yesterday. If we permit and thereby promote the violations of human rights of older people today, it is guaranteed to impact us all tomorrow. This is not about somebody else out there. It's about us in this room, our families and our loved ones and our communities. These are precious rights and they must be valued and protected. In closing, I leave you with these final remarks. Nothing will change without standards and enforcement mechanisms. More money will not do it. 20 years of MIPAA, there's been more deaths in the past 2 years than ever before. 12 years of open-ended working group, more meetings, more papers, that's not going to do it. We need an instrument to make that happen. A convention is now necessary. Finally, I'll put a plug in for GARUP. Please join GARUP. If you're not a member, you're an NGO, we would welcome you, and talk, write, and demand for your rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Karen. Yeah, I see there are already questions from the floor, and I really hope to be able to get back to you and give you the opportunity. But before, I also want to welcome our Minister Marcel Spatari, Minister of Labor and Social Protection from the Republic of Moldova. It's a pleasure to have you here with us, and I would be pleased if you could also say a few words about the implementation of MIPAA in Moldova and how you connect it to the human rights discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Doctor, I did not intend to steal the ending of the panel from you. I was called on duty by my government, and actually I heard that someone in the panel was regretting the insufficient involvement of the European Commission in the discussion. I might try an excuse for the European Commission. It was very busy with assessing the application of Ukraine and Moldova to join the EU, and I'm very glad that today the European Commission has issued a positive opinion on the candidacy of Ukraine and Moldova to the European Union. It is positive, although conditional, we understand it. And 2 days ago, we had a meeting with President Macron in Moldova, and we were given hope. And I'm very happy that you all understand the challenges we are facing, because the war might be in Ukraine, but we are all impacted, very much impacted. 3% of our population, as we speak, is refugees. Many of them are older people, and we have opened our social system to the refugees. They have access to our placement centers, they have access to treatment, to medical care. And we have many mothers with children, incomplete families. 3% is like Belgium or Portugal to the European Union. And you might understand what it means for a small country with limited resources, as Moldova is, to help the refugees. But I understand that the discussion today is about aging, about the implementation of the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging. And I must admit that our country has not moved very far on the agenda, unfortunately. And we have a lot of things to do. For example, we still have inequalities in the labor market for aged people. Our employers complain that they don't have enough labor force, and still we see discrimination based on age when it comes to employment. We see CVs with photos of applicants. We see age taken into account, and even in the announcements we see criteria based on age. Access to education is also limited to older people. Some universities just refuse to provide master's degrees, for example, to older people after a certain age. Our business development also has certain limits, and older people do not have access to subsidies for small and medium enterprises. The opinion of older people is not taking into consideration in the policy making. And yesterday I had a meeting with the Minister of Social Affairs from Austria, and we would like to learn from Seniorenrat. I think in Germany you have also consultation with seniors, and we don't have such a body in Moldova, and we are committed to implement a mechanism of consultation, or a panel of consultation with the representatives of all the people. I could go on and telling you our deficit. I mean, yesterday I had another presentation, and I said how many good things we are doing for the pensioners, and the older people. We increased. Usually, politicians when they increase pensions when they face elections. Our government is new. We are 10 months, and since we entered the office, we increased the minimum pension by 90%, almost doubled it. And we did it in a sustainable manner, and IMF and World Bank were very happy with what we did, although it costs our social security system. But I will not be telling you what we succeeded. I would rather tell you where we have deficits, because this is where we have to act. So I'm very happy to attend this conference and to have bilateral meetings, and we have to learn from the experience of more developed countries, but also, and I said this to my counterparts, other ministers, Moldova is a small country, and we are open even to be, I don't like this term, but I didn't find another better one, to be a test ground for some solutions. Because we are more adapting, we are quicker to adapt, and I invite like bigger countries to Moldova to try to implement things together. Because when we speak of digitalization, it's not only distributed phones and tablets to older people. It's also having information systems that can identify, track, and provide social services to older people. And I know there is a deficit of information systems in almost all European countries when it comes to targeting older people. So we are now developing such a system in Moldova, inspired by the refugee crisis, by the way. And I invite all countries to see our experience and maybe to learn something from our experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Spatari. It was very refreshing to hear also about the deficits and you inviting us to join. And I think I feel really sorry to not be able to open to everybody for the floor to make questions, but I think it is fairer to not allow it, because otherwise only one or two persons will be able to make a question, and then I'm afraid that I wouldn't be able to be fair to my panelists here, who have been very patient, and I was really hoping to be able to give everybody the word again, but I'm looking at the time, and Lisa asked me to stop actually right now. So before she asked me, and we started late. So I'm really sorry for this. I would hope that we had time for more interchange, but I really invite you to speak to all of us, I think also bilaterally afterwards, and let's take this as an opportunity to ask our questions afterwards and stay connected with each other. And just I think two important messages maybe that we can take right now to the next sessions, which came from our panelists here, I think, is one about the follow-up to our joint forum declaration. I think this is something we really need to keep in mind and something very concrete that we can follow up on. And also with the renewal of the regional implementation strategy to really make sure that the human rights of all the persons are strengthened within the next regional implementation strategy. And I think one other point was really that we should join forces also internationally, and this event, the whole couple of days, have been a good opportunity to reconnect, and I hope that we can follow up and don't wait another 5 years to really join forces at international levels, and also stop working on silos and only talking either about MIPAA or about the human rights. We really have to talk about all of this together and make this connection. So many thanks for to all of you for being here, for your contributions and for your patience. And last but not least, I also want to highlight that we have put a couple of publications over there which also are about everything that we discussed today. So please feel free to take some with you. Thank you very much.